Opposition spokesman Paul Holmes.
Thank you, Mrs Jardine, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today and to respond to this debate submitted by my right honourable friend and close constituency neighbour, the right honourable gentleman for East Hampshire. Can I congratulate him, Mrs Jardine? He is my former boss when I was his special advisor, and as you can tell from his speech this afternoon, I was never allowed to write them because he was so brilliant at orating within the chamber. But I know that he is a doughty champion for his constituents in East Hampshire, and I congratulate him on securing this debate. In December 2024, the Government published its reforms to the National Planning Policy Framework, which included the reintroduction of mandatory house building targets. As of March 2025, some local authorities will face an overwhelming five-fold increase in new housing targets dictated by central government. These targets will hit many rural areas, as my right honourable friend outlined, councils hardest, and they are to be imposed with little regard for local people. We firmly believe that building more homes is a necessity. For too long, the dream of home ownership, as my right honourable friend and members across this House have said, for too long, the dream of home ownership has felt out of reach for many hard-working families. And we must make this dream a reality for as many people as possible. A property-owning democracy and people having a house in different areas is vital to giving maturing and succeeding generations a stake in the society in which they live. Now, while I'm supportive of the government's ambitious goal to build 1.5 million new homes, I must stress that these homes must be the right homes built in the right places and by a method that ensures the voices of local communities are listened to. And the troubling reality is that the government's housing targets are frankly unrealistic, and they know it. The Chief Executive of Homes England has cast doubts on whether the government can realistically meet its goal of building those homes. And the Housing Minister himself, in a Select Committee hearing last year, has said that it will be hard for them and virtually nearly not achievable for them to build the 1.5 million homes in the lifetime of this Parliament. And a recent CCN survey found that 9 in 10 councils cited a lack of infrastructure as the main reason they could not support the new targets, with the delivery of new schools, doctors' surgeries and other social infrastructure lagging behind the delivery of housing. But it is not just unrealistic and unpopular targets. It is also the fact that the methodology seemed to represent a cynical gerrymandering exercise of political opportunism. For example, take East Hampshire, the New Forest and Fareham. These areas are being told to build more houses than Manchester, with the New Forest and North East Hampshire having national parks and areas of outstanding natural beauty. But meanwhile, cities like Labour-run Southampton, Nottingham and Coventry see their targets slashed by as much as 50%. It doesn't add up. The government's new method punishes opposition councils for their success and rewards Labour local authorities for failure. Why has the government reduced housing targets in urban areas where it is easier to build due to existing infrastructure and population density and the availability of brownfield sites? But instead, Labour reforms to the NPPF have resulted in top-down targets that will silence local voices. They've chosen to prioritise building in rural areas and on the green belt, rather than focusing on where the demand for housing is greatest, in our cities and in our urban centres. Under the government's proposal set out in the NPPF, councils in county areas will have to deliver at least an extra 64,769 homes per year, equating to 1,240 homes per week. This is 7 times higher than the targets for large towns and cities governed by metropolitan authorities. This rewards cities like Labour-run Southampton City Council, which is consistently under-delivered on its targets, having been required to deliver 1,473 houses in the 23-24 period. They built a mere 261. In response, the government has opted to ensure that they are spared further humiliation for failure by having their target cut by 12%. This is a similar story across the country. In some rural areas, housing targets will increase by 113%, while in urban settings the increase will be a mere 1%. If indeed there is an increase at all, how does this make sense? Now, the Minister will know that I'm no fan of Liberal Democrat-run Eastleigh Borough Council because they are building double the number required because of their because of their excessive borrowing and their failure to run a decent council. But his policies are unfair to councils like that too, which is facing Eastleigh is facing a 42% increase in its house building requirement from 645 houses a year to 922. but they have consistently over-delivered on their housing targets over the last 5 years. So where is the retrospectivity that should be delivered to successful councils that have over-delivered on their promises and their housing targets over the last period? We're seeing this. I will give way to the honourable gentleman.
Did I just hear the honourable member describe his local Liberal Democrat council as successful?
No, I think he's grasping at straws there. I think the Liberal Democrat-run administration in Eastleigh is anything but successful. If you look at value for money and the £750 million worth of debt that his leader has accrued on the people of Eastleigh. But if you look at his method of paying that debt off, which is to build beyond the targets at which they were expected to do while destroying green areas in my constituency, he will see that it is still not fair that his council and my local council are being asked to deliver more homes despite the fact that they've delivered more than was required. That's my point, and my point is that there needs to be retrospectivity to councils that have delivered on those conditions. And it's the same issue in East Hampshire, which, as my honourable friend noted, will see their target rise by 98%, from 575 to 1,142. And in Fareham, which also takes in half of my constituency, they will take a 62% rise from 498 to 800 houses. I must ask the Minister, why are councils which have built more than their required share of housing being punished for their success, whereas their political allies, and generally Labour councils, have had the pressure taken off of them despite their continued failures to deliver? And it is beyond belief that in rural areas, which are already struggling with infrastructure and a fragile environment, they're being handed these inflated housing targets, while urban areas with a far greater demand for housing see their targets reduced. That is not just poor planning, it's unfair. Protecting the green belt and preserving our natural environment are non-negotiable. And yet, under these new policies, we're seeing parts of the green belt reclassified as grey belt land for development, as my honourable friend, the member for not Milton Keynes, he didn't want to be Milton Keynes, for mid-Buckinghamshire. And we cannot allow unsustainable urban sprawl to destroy what we have so worked hard to preserve, including national parks, as my right honourable friend and honourable friend outlined. Further, one of the most disheartening aspects of this debate is the way the government has cut key programmes like Right to Buy, first-time buyer stamp duty relief, while simultaneously reducing affordable homes for purchase. That's not the way to help people onto the property ladder. It's not the way to address the housing crisis, and it certainly shouldn't come at the cost of rural England. And Labour MPs agree. Indeed, 14 Labour front benchers have campaigned against house building in their own constituencies, a contradiction of the Prime Minister's pledge to have a government of builders, not blockers. If Labour can't even get their own party to back their housing targets, how can they expect their Labour council leaders to do so either? In contrast, I'm running out of time, but I'll take one brief intervention.
One of the first visits I had as a new constituent MP was to Allendale Parish Council, one of the most rural areas of my constituency. They were telling me that they recognise the need for housing. So I think it's rather cynical to say that it would be the death of rural England to build more houses.
Well, the honourable gentleman is right in that he should have devolution, and the government's brought that forward. He's Labour leader, may want to build more houses, but what I'm saying is that the government's algorithm is making it easier to build huge numbers of houses in rural England where that infrastructure is harder to deliver, while generally Labour councils and urban centres are having their targets cut. And the Minister shakes his head, but I've just outlined the figures that show that that is the case, including London, as my honourable friend mentioned. And he really does need to go back and re-look at this algorithm, as was the ask by colleagues on this side of the House. In conclusion, many will be pleased to know the road ahead is challenging, but it is not insurmountable. We can build the homes we need if we listen to the communities, respect local voices and commit to sustainable development. The government should rethink their house building algorithm to depoliticise this policy and to local authorities the courtesy of not punishing their hard work by meeting previous targets. I stand with him, ready to come up with an algorithm that works for rural and urban areas. If he takes that up, the Conservative Party will be very committed to helping deliver the 1.5 million homes that he has outlined. But let us work together to ensure that the dream of home ownership remains within reach for everyone, and that we do so in a way that respects our environment, our countryside and our way of life. Thank you.